My name is Jake Pepper, and I'm a police sergeant in a mid-sized police department somewhere in deep Texas. Yes, I've heard jokes about my name so many times that I've lost count. Every second person, when they hear my name, will definitely ask, "Hey, Sergeant Pepper, where is your group of lonely hearts?" Or something like that, and every time they think it's funny. It's no surprise that the Beatles were one of the most popular bands of all time. People still quote them after all these years. But if they knew at least half of what is really going on in my life and work, they might not laugh so easily. Sometimes it seems like they really hit the nail on the head when they titled their famous album Sergeant Pepper and the Lonely Hearts. Who would have thought that this name would be so close to the truth? The longer I serve, the more I realize that loneliness is an integral part of this work. Not that I'm complaining, it's just the harsh reality. Police work requires complete dedication, which means that close relationships often take a back seat. The irony is that I have to be part of a team responsible for maintaining order and security, but in fact, at a deep level, each of us in this department is fighting our own separate battle, sometimes completely alone. So maybe the Beatles had some kind of intuition. We are all lonely hearts in our own ways, especially in this job where every day can become unpredictable and cruel. One way or another, my every working day follows a fairly familiar and long-established scenario. I oversee the daytime patrol division, coordinating the actions of officers responding to calls. This is not always something exciting or dramatic, as one might think from films about everyday police work. In fact, I do a lot of routine things: tracking reports, monitoring how the streets are patrolled, checking that all areas are blocked off. The work isn't boring, but it's also not the kind of work that keeps you on the verge of a breakdown. Routine tasks include responding to domestic violence incidents. This is perhaps one of the hardest parts of the job because dealing with human tragedies, seeing lives and families broken, never gets easier even years later. I also participate in the investigation of traffic accidents, sometimes serious accidents, and sometimes ones that cause more irritation than danger. And of course, there is an endless stream of complaints from disgruntled citizens who don't like how they are treated by officers on the road, especially when it comes to fines. Often I have to listen to the same whining. "Do you know who I am? How could you find me? Because I am a respected citizen," or something like that. People think they can twist the law in their favor simply by relying on their status or connections, but everyone is equal before the law, and this is one of the few principles that I have always wanted to defend. Until now, this day had turned out quite normally, even relatively calmly. I was starting to think it would be just another quiet day, with nothing much going on, just one routine thing after another. Perhaps this would have been the case if not for one unexpected event that radically changed my usual working day, and with it my whole life. I could not even imagine that this morning, when I went to work with the thought that the day would pass as usual, would turn out to be the very day that would turn everything upside down. I am 41 years old, and at first glance I would come across as someone who should not be approached lightly. I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall, which is about 193 centimeters in metric, and I weigh about 220 pounds, which is about 100 kilograms. I can't say that I'm a fan of the gym or any strict diet, but physical fitness has always been an important part of my life, especially since I served in the military before becoming a police officer. My dirty brown hair, which was once lighter, has darkened over time, and my blue eyes have helped me in my work. More than once my gaze can be both calm and tenacious, depending on the situation. I already have 12 years of work in our police department, and during this time I have never doubted that I had chosen the right profession. This job requires a lot, but in return it gives a unique sense of satisfaction. The feeling that you are making the world at least a little safer and fairer. I really enjoy my job and am proud of what I do every day. Before joining the police force, I spent 8 years in the military, where I served in an elite unit, the Army Rangers. It was a difficult time, full of trials and events that forever leave a mark on the soul. During my years of service, I visited Iraq twice, where I saw everything from intense combat operations to the daily struggle to survive in war. These missions hardened me and helped me achieve the rank of lieutenant, which in itself was a significant achievement. The Army taught me discipline, fortitude, and the ability to make difficult decisions under pressure. In all these years, I have never been married, although I have had several serious relationships. But as is often the case, my erratic work schedules and professional commitments were not conducive to building lasting connections. Often my work turned out to be the reason for the breakup. Long shifts, sudden calls, constant readiness for unforeseen situations, all this does not allow me to lead an ordinary family life. In addition, in my profession, it is important to remain clear-headed, and excessive alcohol consumption is strictly discouraged, which became a problem for some women I dated. They may have wanted a more relaxed, leisurely lifestyle, all-night parties and constant going out, but that was never a priority for me. Of course, I can sometimes drink beer, especially with close friends or after a difficult day, but getting drunk is not my thing. I have seen the consequences of alcohol too often, especially on the roads. Drunk drivers, accidents, ruined lives, these are the horrors that remain in the memory for a long time. Therefore, I prefer to control myself and avoid situations where alcohol can cloud my mind. I had just left my office when the dispatcher informed the patrol about a serious accident with injuries at the intersection of Main and 5th Streets. I immediately went there and was the first on the scene. In front of me was a broken-down modern Mercedes and a dump truck parked in the middle of the intersection. The truck seemed to hit the Mercedes straight into the driver's door. The truck driver was detained by concerned citizens who told me he was trying to escape on foot and appeared to be drunk. The driver of the Mercedes was a woman. She was moaning and barely conscious. She was pinned in the seat. The airbags deployed on both the side and front sides. I checked her for injuries. I got into the car through the back window and climbed into the passenger seat. Her pulse was strong, and she began to come to her senses. I told her that she would be fine and that we would get her out of the car as soon as the fire department determined the best way to extricate her. She opened her eyes and saw me. I asked her name, and she replied, Susan Jameson. Then I learned that she was the daughter of Senator Ralph Jameson. I saw her on TV with her father or with some man at events that were definitely above my level. I told her my name was Jake and that I would stay with her until she was pulled out. She complained that her left leg, side, and shoulder were in severe pain. The paramedic handed me a neck collar, and I carefully placed it on her. She screamed at the slightest movement. I knew her leg must be in a lot of pain. It was badly damaged. She asked me if she was dying. I replied, "No, ma'am, you'll be fine once you get to the hospital." The truck was still embedded in her car door, so she had to be cut out of the vehicle. They handed me a thick blanket to cover us while they cut the car with the jaws of life to prevent shards of glass from falling on us. She said she was scared, and I tried to calm her down, assuring her that she wouldn't die in front of me. She grabbed my hand with her right hand and opened her eyes, looking straight into my soul. Every time the pain came, she squeezed my hand tightly, and tears rolled down her cheeks. Don't get me wrong, she was a beautiful woman. She has jet black shoulder-length hair and sky-blue eyes. The roar of the jaws of life drowned out our voices, and I simply held her hand. Susan. I saw the green light and drove through the intersection when I heard a loud bang, felt a sharp pain, and everything went dark. When I came to my senses, I saw that there was a policeman in the car next to me. Pain in my lower leg, shoulder, and side hit me all at once. I screamed from unbearable pain. The officer grabbed my hand. He asked my name and said his name was Jake. He assured me that I was not dying and that they were working to get me out. He put a cervical collar on me, but my leg and foot hurt terribly. I looked down but couldn't see them. As it turned out later, it was for the better that I didn't see them. It was a complete nightmare. I also couldn't move my left arm. My shoulder was apparently either broken or dislocated. The paramedic began placing an Roman 4 in my right arm and placed a heavy blanket over me and the police officer. I squeezed the officer's hand and looked into his eyes. They were great. Surely there was some kind of painkiller in this dropper, because the pain subsided a little and I began to smile, looking at those charming eyes. He also looked into my eyes and continued to reassure me. All I could see was the grill of the truck crashing into my door. Then I heard the noise of a machine, which, as I guessed, was cutting the car into pieces. Then the long-awaited dream came. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital room with my family standing around me. I tried to move, but the pain was too strong. My father said, "Don't move, honey, you just came out of surgery." In my foggy state, I asked why I was having surgery. My father explained that I had been in an accident and the doctors had to put my left ankle and foot back together. The operation lasted 6 hours. I looked at my left leg, which was elevated, and everything from the knee to the toes was bandaged and secured in splints. I saw my nails peeking out, freshly coated with fresh red polish. His left arm was in a garter, and his ribs hurt with every breath. The father said, "You were so close to tragedy. You won't be able to dance for a long time, my dear. The truck driver was drunk, and he ran a red light and hit you at the intersection." All I heard was something like, "cut," as I drifted back to sleep. Then I saw those cold blue eyes again, looking straight into mine. Who they belonged to, I can't remember. Jake, the accident site has finally been cleared. The truck driver was in jail and charged with assault while intoxicated. I needed to change because I got dirty trying to free her crippled leg from under the seat. It's a good thing she was given strong painkillers, otherwise she would have screamed when they splinted her leg. While changing clothes, I mentally returned to a few hours ago. Those eyes, our gazes met. It was as if I had known her all my life, but in reality I only knew her name. I decided to visit her in a few days. She probably has more metal in her ankle now than a Sherman tank. 3 days have passed since the accident. Today is Friday, my day off. I decided it was time to visit Miss Jameson. I went to the hospital and asked for her room number. The nurse replied that she could not provide me with this information at the request of the family. I showed my ID and said that I was one of the officers investigating the accident, and I needed to continue the investigation. Reluctantly, she gave me the room number, and I headed up to the floor. When I entered room 412, I was immediately confronted by Senator Jameson and another family member. They demanded to know who allowed me to come in and why I was there. I explained to them my purpose for the visit, but the senator told me to get all the information through their lawyer. At that moment, I heard a faint voice behind the curtain. "Who is it, Dad?" He replied, "It's just a police officer saying he's investigating an accident." And I heard her say, "It's okay, Dad, let him in." I entered the room and saw her. She was sitting on a chair and looked tired and weak. Her arm was in a garter and her left leg and foot were resting on pillows. I asked, "Hello, Miss Jameson, do you remember me?" She replied, "I think so, officer." Then she looked straight into my eyes and said, "Oh my God, it's you from my dream, your eyes." I said, "My name is Jake. I was in the car with you when you were harassed. I was just in the area and wanted to see how you were doing, but your dad doesn't seem to want me here, so I'll just say get well and be careful with the trucks." I turned and started to walk away when I heard a faint, "Wait." She said, "Please don't go. Can you stay a little longer?" Her father intervened, saying, "You need to rest, not listen to the cops." She replied, "Dad, I'm a grown woman and I want him to stay." I said, "Miss Jameson, I don't want to cause trouble. I'd better leave." I heard her begin to reproach my father as I walked away down the corridor. My father ran out after me and shouted, "Wait." I just nodded and said, "No thanks, I don't want that." I held back from saying what I really wanted to say. I didn't need complaints from some arrogant senator. The next day I was back at work, having just finished filling out a burglary report, when the dispatcher requested that I meet a man in the hospital lobby. Upon arrival, I saw Senator Jameson, a woman whom I assumed was his wife, and a well-dressed guy in an expensive suit who radiated arrogance in all directions. I asked, "How can I help you, Senator?" He replied, "My daughter asked you to come and talk to her again. This is my wife, Kathleen, and Susan's fiancé, Greg Foreman." I extended my hand to shake Foreman's, but all I received in response was a sneer of contempt. "Okay," I said. "It was interesting, but I have a lot to do. What can I do for you and this Mr. Important?" The smirk on Foreman's face turned red with rage. Jameson repeated, "My daughter wants to see you if you have time." I said, "Is that okay with you, Mr. Important?" I could tell I was hitting his pressure points. Now I was angry. He said, "Susan can communicate with anyone she wants." I added, "So far, does this match your approval?" I was tired of these games, and I headed to the elevator and went up to her room. As soon as I saw her, I realized that this was not just a passing interest or superficial admiration. No, it was that same feeling that suddenly overtakes you, makes your heart beat faster, and leaves only one thought in your head. I want to get to know her better. I want to understand who she really is. This feeling came instantly, as if time had slowed down for a few seconds while I was looking at her. But at the same time, the realization came that the chances of any serious relationship between us were extremely small. It wasn't that I didn't believe in the possibilities, it was just that the difference in our status was too obvious. I was a policeman, a person who every minute was immersed in the routine and dangers of his profession, and she was as if from another world, sophisticated and unapproachable. She stood in front of me, and the first thing that caught my eye was her clothes. Simple but elegant, loose trousers that fell all the way to the floor, slightly hugging the cast on her left leg. It seemed that even injury could not deprive her of either grace or self-confidence. It was such a contrast, a broken leg and her confident posture, as if this cast was only a temporary nuisance that did not in any way affect her strength and inner peace. Her hair was perfectly styled, every curl seemed thought out to the smallest detail. The makeup is barely noticeable, but definitely emphasizes her natural beauty. It seemed that everything in her appearance was impeccably calibrated, but at the same time natural. Her beauty was genuine, it seemed to glow from within, and it was attractive. It was not just external attractiveness, but something deeper, something that spoke of strength of character and life experience. When she smiled, I felt that this smile, warm and sincere, somehow in a strange way softened all my inner doubts. I may have been a cop, but that didn't matter now. She came closer and, still smiling, quietly and calmly apologized for her father's behavior the day before. I said I smiled and tried to soften the situation. "It's okay. He's just protecting his daughter from the big, scary cop. I think any father would do the same. How are you feeling, Miss Jameson?" She looked at me, slightly embarrassed by the formal address, and corrected, "Call me Susan. Please, no formalities." Her voice was calm, but there was warmth and weariness from recent events in it. "I already feel better than in the first days. Although, of course, this is far from an ideal condition," she chuckled weakly, glancing at her leg in a cast. "I will have to walk on crutches for several months and then most likely use a walker. Honestly, this whole situation has turned into a real recovery operation. I think they called all the people in the auto repair shop to put my foot and ankle back together. Screws, pins, plates, just imagine it. Probably the next time I go through a metal detector at the airport, security will definitely go crazy because they will think I'm a robot." Her tone was ironic, but fatigue was clearly heard in it. We both laughed. It was that moment when laughter helps to lighten the atmosphere and relieve tension, but I noticed how she quickly winced in pain. Her leg twitched slightly, and I realized that even this innocent laughter was causing her discomfort. Her courage impressed me. Despite the pain, she tried to carry herself lightly and maintain a positive mood, as if she did not want to bother anyone with her injury. "I'm being discharged home today," she continued, changing her tone to a more businesslike one, although her eyes were still soft and friendly. "Dad and my friend have already arrived to pick me up. By the way, they were nearby all this time while the doctors finished putting this miracle plaster on what was left of my foot." She nodded at her bandaged leg with slight irony. "As you can see, I still have a long time to recover, but I wanted to see you, thank you in person, before I was discharged. This was important to me." Her words took me by surprise. I didn't expect her to specifically wait for the moment to thank me, and it left some kind of warm, almost touching feeling inside. She could have simply gone home and focused on her recovery and family support, but instead she took the time to express her gratitude. There was no self-pity in her eyes, no resentment for what happened to her. On the contrary, in her smile and words, I felt the inner strength that always attracts people. I said, "I understand, your friend is your fiancé. We have already met." She frowned and tried to get up. I handed her the crutches and helped her up. She hobbled towards me. She looked me in the eyes and said, "You feel it too, right?" I thought for a moment. What am I doing? This will never work. I responded, "Feeling what, Susan?" Tears streamed down her cheeks, and I tried my best to hold back mine. She put the card in my hand, and I said, "I better go. Your fiancé is waiting for you with a carriage, madam." At that moment, the door to the room opened, and a nurse with a wheelchair appeared on the threshold again. She smiled politely and then carefully helped Susan move into a chair, being careful not to cause her unnecessary pain. Susan, although she endured it, still could not hide the fatigue that was clearly visible in her eyes, and in the way she moved carefully and slightly tensely, as if every movement brought her discomfort. However, she maintained her usual grace, even despite the injury. We moved towards the elevator together, and in the silence that arose between us, I felt an invisible connection, something elusive that hung in the air, but so far remained unexpressed. As the elevator slowly descended to the first floor, I suddenly realized that I did not want this moment to be the last. It seemed to me that this was not just a chance meeting, but something more that we both could not yet understand. An idea arose in my head, and following an internal impulse, I took a business card out of my pocket. My business contacts were already printed on the front, but I decided to add a personal touch. Quickly writing my phone number on the back, I quietly placed it in her bag, which was lying on the armrest of her wheelchair. Susan didn't notice, and I was glad for that it was my small gesture, hoping that maybe she would contact me when she felt ready. As we exited the elevator into the lobby, I saw a large black limousine pull up a car that immediately betrayed the status and position of her family with its appearance. Susan still carried herself with dignity despite all the discomfort. Her father, as always, remained on top, carefully helping her transfer from her wheelchair to the car. It seemed that he was used to resolving all issues clearly and without unnecessary emotions, like a person accustomed to being in control of the situation. I stood to the side, by my car, and watched as the nurse helped Susan out of the chair, and her father held her tightly by the arm, carefully supporting her every step. When she looked back, our eyes met. I smiled at her, hoping to convey the warmth that had accumulated during these few minutes of communication. She answered me with a smile, but there was sadness in it. This smile was both grateful and sad, as if there was something more hidden in it than just fatigue from a long treatment. Perhaps she already understood that our meeting was something significant, just like I did. Her father helped her into the limousine, and as the car slowly pulled away, leaving a smooth black trail on the asphalt, I still couldn't take my eyes off the place where she had just stood. As I got into my car and started the engine, thoughts of what happened came flooding into my mind. Something changed that day, at that fateful moment when her car was wrecked. Something important, deep, connected us, even if at first glance it seemed impossible. We both did not yet realize the scale of what we began to feel, but I was sure that it was not by chance that I ended up at the scene of the accident at that very moment. It was more than just fulfilling duties, it was a feeling as if our souls had crossed paths at some point. When I pulled out a business card that said, "Susan M. Jameson, attorney," everything fell into place. Of course, she was not just anyone, but one of the top lawyers at one of the most prestigious law firms in Texas. I could already imagine her workday courtrooms, important meetings, working with high-status clients. Her life was far from mine, and the difference in our statuses was so obvious that I even felt a little stupid. On the card, among other things, her personal phone number was indicated, and this fact made me think even deeper. She was light years ahead of me. I am an ordinary police officer with a difficult past, and an unpredictable future, and she is a successful lawyer with a brilliant career. And most importantly, she was engaged. A serious commitment that meant her heart already belonged to someone else. And what was I even thinking at that moment? How could I hope for anything more? Susan. Damn it. Greg told him he was my fiancé. I didn't wear my wedding ring after the accident due to swelling on my left hand, and I wasn't wearing it the day of the accident. I don't care what he said, I saw it in his eyes. He felt it too. I know how I felt. I started unpacking my hospital bag and slowly made my way to the laundry room. I needed to see how many pants I had that could fit on this damn cast. The doctor said I would have to wear it for 8 to 10 weeks and not step on my foot for 4 weeks. I looked at my toes sticking out of the cast and decided I needed a pedicure if I was going to show my toes to the world for the next 2 months. The doctor said the damage to my foot and ankle was severe, and I was on the verge of losing my leg. I can only hope that my leg will function normally in the future. Another operation may be required. My thoughts went back to Jake and Greg. What should I do about Greg? My father forced me into this relationship. I agreed to his proposal only so that my father would leave me alone. Constantly, Greg this, Greg that. Well, that's enough already. He has become very possessive, and I don't like it. I know he thinks he has me under control while I can't move properly. I heard Greg come into the house and ask, "Susan, where are you?" I replied, "I'm in the laundry room." At that moment, the card fell out of my bag. I leaned down to pick it up, trying not to lose my balance, but Greg noticed it first and grabbed it. He looked at her and began to vomit. I said, "Give it to me, please." I saw that it was Jake's card. Greg said, "So you have the damn cop's card and his phone number. Probably the next step will be for you to start sleeping with him." I slapped him. He raised his hand as if he was going to hit me, but then I heard my father calling me. I said, "Come on, Greg, try it. This will be the first and last time, do you understand? Now get out." He left and I put the card in my pocket. The next day was Saturday. I called the number on the card and Jake answered. I said, "Hi, Jake. This is Susan Jameson. I really need to talk to you. I know you felt it the same way I did." Jake responded, "Susan, this is a bad idea. Your father hates me, and when I see your fiancé again, I'll probably get fired because I'll beat him up. So maybe we shouldn't continue with what we have. This could end badly for me. I can't compete with you in your circle, and we both know it, Miss Jameson." I said, "Stop calling me Miss Jameson. My name is Susan, Jake." He replied, "Okay, Susan, but that doesn't change anything. We are from different worlds, and you are a beautiful, successful lawyer who is promised to a man suitable for your status and the status of your family. My relationships usually don't last long because of my job, my schedule, and the things people like me do." I said, "Jake, I will still find you, even if I have to walk on these crutches to your house." He replied, "Susan, you just returned home from the hospital after major surgery. You need to rest and recover, not try to make something happen that will never happen. Get well and be happy, Susan." And he hung up. That evening, my father and mother visited me in the downstairs bedroom I had been using while I was recovering in their mansion. They saw that I was crying. My mother thought I was in pain, not knowing the real reason for the tears, and asked if I needed painkillers. It seems that my father already understood what was bothering me, but he remained silent. Later, I heard my father and Greg whispering, making plans to keep Jake from interfering with their plans for my future. I didn't hear the details, but I knew they were up to something. Jake. Early Monday morning, I came to work and checked my email before going out. And then I heard over the intercom, "Sergeant Pepper, please go to the captain's office." I thought this was not good, but I could not remember anything that I or my officers had done recently to cause trouble. I went to see the captain, and he informed me that another sergeant would be assigned to investigate the accident involving the Jameson family and that I should have no further contact with them. The captain said, Senator Jameson believes that your attention to his daughter is inappropriate and asks that this information be conveyed to you. I didn't argue, I simply replied, "Yes, sir," and went on patrol. Power has its privileges, and I knew who had that power, and it definitely wasn't me. I changed my phone number so Susan couldn't reach me anymore. I tried to distract myself, but her face kept appearing in my thoughts. I understood that prudence is valor, and I knew that I had no chance of winning this battle. Life went on as usual. Susan. For 4 days, I tried to call Jake, but I kept hearing a message that the number was no longer in service. I called the department, but they told me that he was not there. My mobility was extremely limited, otherwise I would have already been driving around the streets looking for him. I made several calls, and through my sources, I found out his address. I called an Uber and told them to pick me up from my parents' house. A large black SUV picked me up to make me comfortable. This was my first trip after the hospital. We drove past Jake's house, which looked like a small two-room house in a nice neighborhood. The house was well kept, with beautiful landscaping. I asked the driver to stop a little further down the street and wait. He said that he could not wait long. He had many calls. I gave him $500 and said, "Shut up and wait." There were no more questions. I leaned back in the seat, raised my leg on the pillow. The pain became unbearable. We waited. Around 5:15, an old GMC pickup drove past us and pulled into Jake's driveway. Jake walked out, and my heart almost stopped when he checked the mailbox. He looked amazing in his uniform. I wondered what he was like in bed. In my bed, I watched as he entered the house. I gave him about 5 minutes and told the driver to give me a ride and help me get out onto the sidewalk. I took my crutches and hobbled unsteadily up the 3 steps to his front door with the help of the driver. He returned to the car. I mustered all my courage and rang the doorbell. Jake. I had just put on jeans, was still shirtless and barefoot when the doorbell rang. I wasn't in the mood to have guests. Damn. I opened the door to see Susan rocking on her crutches with one ballet flat on her right foot that didn't seem to give her enough support. I said, "Susan, damn it." She almost fell, but I caught her and carried her to the sofa, laying her down carefully. I took 2 pillows and raised her leg to make her comfortable. Susan said, "Jake, I had to see you, talk to you. I'm dying inside, feeling lost, not being able to talk to you or see you. Jake, I don't know how it happened, but the day I ended up in that wrecked car, I fell in love with you. Your touch after I saw your eyes set my heart on fire." She just laid it all out and opened her heart to me. She said, "I tried to call you, but your number is disconnected. No one in the department says anything." Finally, I said, "Susan, my superiors have ordered me to cease all communication with you, and another sergeant has been assigned to investigate the accident. I might get fired if they find out you're here. I changed my phone number." She started saying, "What the hell is going on?" Then it dawned on her. Greg and her father put pressure on my superiors. "Crap," I said. "Susan, I'm sure your father used his influence to make sure I didn't ruin the life of his little daughter who was about to marry his chosen one." She replied, "I had no idea, Jake. I'm so sorry." I said, "Me too. You better leave before we both get in trouble." She replied, "Jake, I'm 28 years old, a grown woman and a successful lawyer. Tomorrow I will start looking for a new law firm. This nonsense has gone too far. Sit next to me." I sat down on the floor next to the sofa, close enough. We kissed for the first time. She said, "I knew from the moment I looked into your eyes in that wrecked car that I loved you." I replied, "I know, Susan. I felt it too. I knew you were the one, but I also knew it wouldn't work out between us. Your father is a very influential man, and I cannot compete with him if I want to continue living. Please, Susan, go home, live your life. I will love you from afar, but we are from different worlds." She said, "No, Jake, please don't make me leave." She leaned over and kissed me. Then she whispered, "Jake, make love to me." What am I doing? but I complied with her request. Afterwards, I asked if she needed help getting to the bathroom. She replied, "No, honey, I want to be with you, Jake." I said, "Honey, we're doomed and we both know it. What happened was amazing, but it can't happen again. I won't be able to fit into your world." I kissed her one last time and helped her get to her Uber. I made sure she was comfortable and left. I couldn't let her see my tears. As the car drove away, I said to myself, "Farewell, my love." Susan. When the Uber returned me home, I saw that my father was home and Greg's Ferrari was parked in the driveway. The driver helped me get out and get home. The father ran into the room and shouted, "Where the hell have you been?" I replied, "It's none of your fucking business, and don't you dare talk to me like that again. I'm not some snotty teenager you can boss around." I started crying. I just looked at Greg, who wanted to say something, but I stopped him. "Don't, Greg. Just don't." I heard my father say to Greg, "She was probably with him. Tomorrow he will look for work in Alaska." I said, "I'll say it once, Dad. Leave him alone. I'm serious. If you lift a finger to influence him in any way, you will lose me forever. You can consider this a threat." My mom heard our conversation and said, "Susan, watch your language." I replied, "Get used to it. Everything will change. And by the way, I'm returning to my apartment tomorrow. I'll take Uber and hire a nurse until I can get around better." The father decided to fight back. He said, "You can't work and I won't pay the nurse or your salary if you leave home." I said, "Great, I'm sure a lot of law firms that hate you will be happy to hire me. They wouldn't even put you out if you caught fire." I hobbled towards my room to pack my things. It was the biggest fight with my father in my entire life. Greg was stunned and realized he had lost me. I went to bed. Jake. Well, that wasn't surprising. The next morning, I received my resignation notice after 12 years of dedicated service to the department. The old man couldn't wait to call the boss and threaten him, and the boss decided that I was easily replaceable. I filed a complaint and an appeal, but I understood that the authorities had an advantage. It was a losing battle. My house was paid off, so I put up a "for rent" sign, closed it up, packed up my things, and left town. By the time I arrived at the new place, I had found a tenant. I moved 2 states away and found a good job as a private investigator. The hours were long, but the pay was good, plus I received rental income from my old house. I found a nice 2-bedroom apartment and traded my old pickup truck and some cash for a sky blue 1969 Ford Mustang Boss. Now my job was to find unfaithful wives and husbands, protect important people, which gave the opportunity to see other parts of the world and search for people who did not want to be found. I still think about Susan every day, but I've moved on, as has she, I guess. I didn't hear her looking for me, so apparently the infatuation had passed. I sometimes look at the Gossip Chronicles section of the newspaper to see what she's up to. I even learned that several humiliated wives, now divorced from unfaithful husbands, showed interest in me. No love, just communication and great sex. But nothing compares to that one day I spent with Susan, although life moves on. I changed my appearance for work, grew a beard, let my hair grow, and kept myself in shape. Camouflage is an important part of undercover operations, as I learned in the Army and became a master at it. Susan. This bastard did it after all. He got Jake fired. I tried to call him, but his number was changed again. My Uber drove past his house, but there was an unfamiliar car parked in the yard. I barely made it to the door on my crutches, and a young woman opened the door for me. I asked Jake, and she thought for a minute and then said I guess I meant their landlord. We rented this place a week ago. Jake left and my heart broke. I cried until I had no tears left for what I had lost. I was both sad and furious. As promised, I quit my father's company. I had enough savings because I was a great lawyer, so I didn't need his job or his money. I also received a hefty settlement from the shipping company and their insurance. I gave the ring back to Greg and told him to disappear so he wouldn't come into my life again. He was not happy, called me all possible names, and threatened that this was not the end. I was still confined to crutches and dependent on help from others rather than family to get around. I have worked hard in rehab to regain my mobility, but it looks like I will forever be left with a noticeable limp and deep scars on my injured foot and ankle. I often use a cane to take pressure off my reconstructed ankle and foot. Well, okay, it doesn't matter anymore. If I can't be with Jake, I'm not going to look for a romantic relationship anytime soon. 6 months have passed since the accident. I tried to find Jake everywhere, but it seemed that he did not want to be found. I can't blame him after everything he went through because of my family. I made a lot of calls, made contacts, and found a new job at a prestigious law firm in Washington, D.C. I avoided my father like fire. If I saw him at any event, I went the other way. I was still trying to find Jake, but had no luck. I missed those eyes and everything connected with them. All my attempts to find him were unsuccessful. It's been almost 5 years since my father destroyed the love of my life. I will never forgive him. I filed a lawsuit against the city for wrongful termination of Jake on his behalf and won significant compensation for him. I put the money in an interest accrued account, waiting for the day when I could find it. My job took up a lot of my time, and I tried to move on with my life, even dating some nice men. I even had sex with some of them, but my dates are now strictly platonic. My cane and limp make me look older than my 33 years, but I think I still attract attention. I loved my stilettos, but my foot and ankle wouldn't let me wear them anymore. I hope someone gets some use out of those expensive shoes I donated to the charity shop. I often attend political and high-profile events because now I have become quite famous and even famous in some circles, according to some, as a strict and business-like lawyer. I always come with a gentleman, but for me they are just decorations. I make it clear right away that I am not looking for sex or a husband. That ship sailed when I lost Jake. Strange. We only spent that one day together, kissing and making love, but it feels like he wrote himself into my soul. Jake, it's been 5 years since I left my old life behind. Despite Senator Jameson's efforts, I got back on my feet and made progress. I started my own personal security company, SMJ Investigations, which stands for Susan Marie Jameson. I found out years later that Susan filed a lawsuit against the city on my behalf, but I don't know how it turned out. The city stood no chance against the senator on one side and Susan on the other, who was seeking justice for the way I was treated. There was no doubt that she loved me, but I think we both understood that we were from different worlds. Should I have stayed and fought for us? Perhaps, but I saw no chance of success with the power behind her and those who manipulated her future. I grew my business and my clients became high-end and demanding. Now most of my work involved armed guarding VIPs, foreign diplomats, and the average rich and famous with a sense of entitlement. I had 4 employees working for me. My regular client was Janet Lee Winchester, 38, blonde, beautiful, perfect in every way, except that she was an arrogant bitch, but she loved me. She was a famous fashion designer with contacts all over the world, including some who didn't like her very much. She was ruthless in her dealings and did not spare anyone when necessary. That's why I was often with her when she traveled, which happened at least twice a month. All her attempts to seduce me did not work at first. Well, yes, of course. I'm only human. I ended up in her bed more than once. But there was no real love between us, just amazing sex. One day we were lying in bed, and she said that we had to go to a fashion show in Washington that Friday night. She said that we would fly there that day, walk around, do a little shopping, and in the evening we would go to a gala evening. Mandatory dress code, tuxedo, and evening dress. Sometimes I felt like I was more like a paid companion than a bodyguard, but that was part of the job and I was paid well. The day of her event arrived, and sure enough, we had only been in the air for about 5 minutes when she closed the bedroom door on the plane and we had sex. She said, "Marry me, Jake. I want your children." I said, "Janet, we come from different worlds. I don't fit into yours, and you don't fit into mine. We're better off being customers with benefits." She looked dejected, but knew I was right. Janet, what's wrong with me? Lately, I've been increasingly haunted by one thought that I can't get rid of. I think I'm starting to fall in love with Jake. This feeling awakens in me gradually, but more and more every day. When I'm next to him, it's as if some kind of fire ignites inside me, quiet, but so warm that I can't help but notice it. He makes me feel special in a way I've never felt with anyone else. Every time we make love, I feel not only physical pleasure, but also how much he cares about me. He is not only attentive, he goes out of his way to make me feel safe and comfortable, and at the same time, he knows how to please me. This is not just passion, it is something deeper, more personal. Jake is a person who sees me as I am, with all my quirks and idiosyncrasies. He accepts me completely without trying to change me or adjust me to his expectations, which is rare. He even likes my little personal quirk, something that usually annoys others, but Jake takes it with warmth and humor. He and I are different in many aspects, but it is this difference that makes us closer. He knows how to gently but firmly put me in my place when my snobbish side comes out, that part of me that I am sometimes not aware of, but which apparently catches my eye. He is not afraid to show me that I am going too far, and he does it in such a way that I do not feel humiliated or offended. On the contrary, his honesty and firmness attracts me even more. I'm not used to having someone challenge me in a relationship, but damn, I love it. When he looks at me with his clear, penetrating eyes, I feel that for him I am not just another woman, but someone special, someone important. His touch, his words, even his silence, all this says that I mean much more to him than words can express. He doesn't make unnecessary compliments or ostentatious gestures. He's just there, real, confident in himself and in us. And this is his strength. This is his special magic. And despite all my inner complexity, despite my habit of always controlling everything and keeping everything under clear guidance, with Jake, I allow myself to be weak. I don't lose myself around him, but I feel like I can relax and trust. It's scary and exciting at the same time. I'm not used to someone being able to influence my emotions like that, but this feeling being with him, opening up to him is so amazing that I don't want to lose it. Maybe I'm falling in love with Jake because he knows how to reveal sides of me that I haven't noticed for a long time. Or perhaps the fact is that he perceives me as I am, with all my advantages and disadvantages, and still remains close, remains real. I try to keep him busy with my own business, just to be with him. Selfish, I know, but I want him, and I feel calm with him. I've been receiving some pretty nasty emails lately. I haven't been able to figure out where they are from yet. I haven't told him yet, but I'm starting to get a little scared. I'll discuss this with him tonight after the party. I was in my hotel room getting ready when Jake knocked on the door. I told him to come in. I was in another room of the suite, sitting naked on the bed and pulling stockings up my legs and thighs. When he came in, he saw my outstretched leg and thigh through the open door. He stopped and smiled. I said, "Saw something you like, sailor." He came up to me, so handsome in his tuxedo. We made love. I finished getting dressed, making sure the seams on my stockings were even. I didn't wear any panties or bra under my long evening dress, only the garter belt and the stockings themselves. I put on my 5-inch heels, my red toes clearly visible through the thin stockings. We got into the limousine and went to the place. Jake. We entered the room the same way we had done so many times over the past 18 months, arm in arm, like an experienced couple long accustomed to such public appearances. Janet, as always, looked impeccable. Her elegant dress emphasized her graceful figure, and her confident gait indicated that she knew perfectly well how to control the attention of others. As soon as she found herself among the guests, she immediately began to communicate with beautiful people, as I called them to myself. These were those who were distinguished by social manners, high connections, and a cold smile, a world in which Janet felt like a duck to water. I, in turn, immediately went into observation and protection mode. It became second nature to me to stay close, monitor the situation, analyze everyone who approached Janet, but not interfere in her conversations. I was always on the line between presence and invisibility, waiting, ready for any surprises, but trying not to attract attention. My Sig Sauer rested securely in a shoulder holster under my jacket, and its weight was almost unnoticeable. I was accustomed to carrying it so that I could not feel it, but be ready for action at a moment's notice. This gave me confidence that if anything went wrong, I was armed and ready to protect her. While Janet was talking, throwing out casual phrases and friendly smiles, I continued to carefully observe the hall. The people around seemed immersed in conversations and glasses of champagne, but my attention constantly slid over their faces, movements, and gestures. I looked at each one with professional precision, looking for the slightest sign of threat or abnormal behavior. And so, among the noisy conversations and muffled laughter, I noticed none other than Senator Jameson himself. The bastard, as I always called him to myself, stood at the edge of the hall, surrounded by a group of people, clearly posing as an important person. His loud laugh and pompous gestures showed that he was once again enjoying his influence and status. This man was always the center of attention, and he liked it. The years had not changed him the same smug look, the same arrogance that I could not stand. Of course, he wouldn't recognize me now. I had a thick beard and full head of hair, and I looked completely different than when we met before. He wouldn't have connected me with that guy who once stood in front of him as a completely different person. I watched him, remaining in the shadows, as was always the case in my work. But old memories were boiling inside me, awakening forgotten emotions. Jameson, this man who always knew how to manipulate situations in his favor, now seemed to me just an empty phrase among beautiful people. But I continued to watch him, not allowing myself to be distracted for a second, realizing that my main task today was not to let my emotions control me, but to focus on protecting Janet. Looking at him, I thought, same old bastard, braggart, windbag, and just a pain in the ass. I stayed by Janet's side while she charmed those around her. Jameson noticed her and immediately headed towards her with Greg, guess who, following him. She was grudgingly gracious when Jameson and Greg forced themselves on her. None of them recognized me. Jameson said, "Janet, I hope you remember Greg, my rising star at the firm." She replied, "Oh yes, it seems he was engaged to your daughter, if I'm not mistaken, Senator." Greg said, "Yes, she was, but it didn't work. She didn't fit into our lifestyle." Janet said, "On the contrary, Greg, I heard she's here in Washington and has made quite a name for herself." He asked, "Oh, do you know Susan?" Janet said, "Only by reputation as a hell of a lawyer." Greg said, "Janet, I'd love to take you out to dinner sometime. Is tomorrow night convenient for you?" Janet, as always, replied, "Why not?" and gave him the hotel address for 7 p.m. She looked at me and I shrugged, letting her know that it was up to her, as if to say that I was just an employee. Janet didn't know my history with these two, and there was no reason why she should have. We were great sex partners, but nothing more than that, I thought. I tried to be a caring and attentive lover, although I knew that we had no future beyond a business relationship. Jameson didn't pay any attention to me, but Greg looked at me strangely and asked, "Do we know each other?" I replied, "I don't think so," and walked away, still keeping Janet in my sight. Janet knows better than to reveal our security to anyone and didn't tell Greg. Later I saw Jameson, Greg, and another man pointing at Janet and quietly discussing something. My radar sense worked for the bastards. As I scanned the crowd, I noticed a dark-haired woman in a beautiful blue evening dress on the arm of a tall, dark-haired man who seemed to literally worship her. I noticed that she was shorter than the other women in heels because she was wearing very sexy flat sandals. She had a cane in her hand and was leaning on it. They began to walk away, and her companion leaned over and kissed her. She turned slightly towards me. I thought, "No, this can't be. Oh God, it's Susan." They left, and Susan was still leaning on her cane. Apparently, the ankle never recovered 100%. I walked closer, knowing she wouldn't recognize me, but I wanted to take a closer look. She was as beautiful as the first day we met in the hospital, the day she was discharged. My heart broke when I heard the man introduce her as his bride. Everyone said, "Neil, she's just a godsend." How did you manage to win her? He replied, with his charm and wit. She smiled at him, her eyes shining with warmth and sincere affection, and then gently took his hand. It was the same gesture that spoke about everything about trust, about love, about intimacy, which there was no longer a need to prove between them. They seemed completely immersed in each other, and for a moment I felt that I was an extra observer of someone else's happiness. I was close enough that she could see me if she happened to look in my direction, but even if her gaze fell on me, she most likely would not recognize me. 5 years is a long time, and people change during that time. So do I. Well, my chance was lost 5 years ago. I thought about this with some bitter clarity. She had found her true love, the one she might have been looking for all this time, and now they stood together like two halves of one whole. I, in fact, was just a ghost from her past, one of those who simply passed through her life, but did not stay. I knew that this was no longer my story, and never would be. But everything changed the moment she, as if sensing something, turned her head in my direction. Our eyes met. It was a split second, but it seemed like time slowed down. She looked at me with an expression of incomprehension, as if something vaguely familiar flashed before her eyes, but she could not figure out what it was. Her eyes narrowed, and something flashed in them that I couldn't really decipher. At that moment, I also caught her gaze, and the same woman I once knew opened up in front of me, but now she was different. More confident, perhaps happier. And then I saw him. A huge diamond sparkling on her left hand. Wedding ring. A symbol of her new life, her new obligations, her new love. This diamond seemed to scream that she belonged to someone else, that her heart was no longer for me. Everything was clear without words. There was nothing left for me to do here. I turned away, feeling a strange combination of sadness and relief welling up inside me. I let her go a long time ago, but this meeting, accidental, unplanned, finally put an end to it. No further words, no drama. She was now part of another world, a world that I could only observe from afar, and that was all right. I quietly left, disappearing into the noise and crowd, leaving her with her new happiness. Susan. My leg hurts terribly. I didn't want to be here. Neil, my fiancé, convinced me to go with him to this gala. To make matters worse, both Dad and his handy Greg are with him. I haven't talked to them, and I don't intend to. I listened as the men discussed how Neil had stolen my heart and pulled me out of my depression. Was I happy? Who knows? I asked myself this question more than once, but each time I found different answers. It seems like I should be happy. I agreed to marry him, and it was a deliberate decision, not a spontaneous impulse. He is a good person, reliable, attentive, always there when I need it. He is a pleasure to look at, attractive, confident, with the kind of appearance that many women admire. He is also quite good in bed, quite affectionate and attentive. He's trying, and I appreciate that. We lead a stable life built on trust and respect. It seems like everything should be in its place. And in fact, it is so. On paper, I have everything you could dream of. Strong relationships, a secure life, a beautiful future that we are building together. But despite all these advantages, there was still something hovering inside me that I could not fully explain. It was as if something was missing, as if a part of me remained in the past, somewhere far away, with something that I had lost, but did not completely let go. Unfortunately, no matter how much time passed, no man could compare to what Jake did to me that day all those years ago. This was not just a random moment in my life. It was something more, something that was imprinted in my memory with amazing clarity, despite the years. Everything happened so quickly, but I still remember his touch, that look, that passion that seemed to revive me from the inside, awakening feelings that I had never experienced before. Every time I'm alone, these memories pop up in my head, returning inexorably, no matter how hard I try to forget them. In the silence of my bedroom, with no one around to distract me from my own thoughts, I often relive that day over and over again. This feeling, a mixture of irresistible craving and lost opportunity, haunted me. Jake. He was different. With him, everything seemed more real, more vibrant, more alive. I often wonder what would have happened if our lives had turned out differently, if that day had not been our last. Sometimes I allow myself to be lost in these memories for a moment, even though I know they will bring nothing more than a brief surge of emotion and a little bitterness. But they do not disappear, they continue to live somewhere deep inside as an integral part of me. Jake was the one who left a mark on my heart, a mark that has not faded even after all these years. I'm on the pill, so I'm not too worried about pregnancy yet. Neil wants kids someday, but I'm not ready yet. I'm not getting any younger, and I'm practically crippled. My leg did not recover as well as the doctors had hoped. I'm not sure I can run after kids all day, no matter how much I love them. I still feel a lot of pain at times. As we started to leave, I noticed a man looking at me. Our eyes met, and I felt something familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on it. He had a beard and long, thick hair that hid his facial features, but something about him seemed vaguely familiar to me. Should I know him? He looked completely different than he once did, but something in his gaze, in the manner of his movement, persistently awakened vague memories. I continued to look at him, trying to catch this strange shadow of the past, but before I could figure it out, he turned his gaze to the ring on my finger. His eyes fell on this brilliant symbol of my commitment, the ring, which now seemed not just an ornament, but a barrier between us. His face tensed slightly, and as if he had heard a silent answer to his questions, he turned around and left without saying a word. I watched as he approached a woman standing nearby. It was Janet Winchester, known for her scandalous reputation. She was the type of woman everyone talked about, but who was not invited into respectable houses. Janet seemed to glow with joy as he took her arm. She looked at him with an expression that only a woman understands. It was that same look that speaks without words. She was in love. Her eyes shone, full of tenderness and quiet confidence that she belonged to him. I remember this look very well. Once upon a time, many years ago, I looked at Jake the same way. They headed towards the exit together, their silhouettes disappearing among the flickering lights of the hall. I stood there, unable to move, trying to comprehend what was happening. Following them were my father, Greg, and another man whom I did not know. My father was serious, as always, and did not take his eyes off me, but I barely noticed him. All my attention was focused on the man who had appeared so unexpectedly and just as suddenly disappeared. They went outside, and I watched through the glass as their limo slowly drove away. Janet and Jake together. This image is imprinted in my head, but it wasn't until the car disappeared around the corner that it finally dawned on me. Oh my God, those eyes, it was Jake. Jake, my Jake. The same man whom I could not forget all these years was standing right in front of me, but I did not recognize him. How could I be so blind? Everything turned upside down inside. A sudden storm of emotions swept over me, a wave of regret, pain, memories. All this happened in a matter of seconds, but it seemed as if time had slowed down. In a panic, gripped by an unknown desire, I took a step forward, as if I could catch up with the limousine or at least see him again. My legs barely obeyed me as I hurriedly descended from the curb, and then it happened. My ankle, which had never been completely normal after the injury, suddenly twisted, and a sharp pain pierced me like a knife. I didn't even have time to scream. Everything happened so quickly. I lost my balance and fell, feeling pain spreading throughout my leg like fire. Everything around me swam before my eyes. Lying on the cold sidewalk, I clenched my teeth in pain, but only one thought was spinning in my head: Jake. The same Jake I once loved and lost. I screamed, "Neil, I think I hurt my leg." I saw my father coming towards me. I said, "Get away from me, you bastard. Don't touch me." He still didn't understand the hatred I felt for him. My ankle was swelling. They brought the car, and two men picked me up and put me in the back seat. Someone brought ice and put it on my ankle. I was taken to the emergency room. God, my leg should be glowing in the dark by now from all the x-rays I've had over the years. The doctor looked at the x-ray and said, "You have a lot of metal in your foot and ankle." I said, "Really, doctor? And what's the verdict?" He said, "Severely sprained ankle and broken bone in foot. This should heal in time. I don't see any damage to the surgical repair. Screws and plates are in place, but you will need to be on crutches for at least 6 weeks. Bed rest with ice and elevation legs for a week. No weight on the leg. Painkillers if needed. They secured my ankle and foot with an elastic bandage until the swelling went down. He said, "I think a boot will do at this stage." Neil helped me get to our room. All I could think about was Jake. It was him, my Jake. I know that he saw me, but he doesn't know that I recognized him. This is too strange. Deja vu. My leg is broken again, I'm engaged to another man, and here's Jake. Again. What's wrong with this picture? I thought, what about Neil? He's not like Greg. It would hurt him if he knew about my real feelings for another man. What should I do? I'm so confused. And that bitch Winchester. Did she really get her claws into him? I asked Neil to find me a private room so I could rest before going home. He didn't like it, but he agreed. I was in a lot of pain and took painkillers as soon as I got into bed. Neil lifted my leg up onto the pillows and the medicine began to take effect. I said, "Thanks, Jake," and fell asleep. Nil. Susan has been acting strange ever since she saw that man and woman as they were leaving. She was trying to catch up with them when she fell. "Who is Jake?" She said, "Thanks, Jake," as she fell asleep. Maybe I should ask her dad if he knows any Jake. I don't want anything to ruin my plans for Susan. I'm too close to getting what I want, and her father is going to help me get it when we get married. Jake. I have to admit, I was a little jealous when Janet agreed to go to dinner with this idiot tomorrow night. These two don't do anything just like that, without a purpose. What were they up to? My antennae went up. We drove away from the mansion and Janet told the driver to drive a little. We will let him know when we want to return to the hotel. So off we went. Janet leaned towards me and gave me another passionate kiss. She said, "You're jealous, aren't you, big boy? You're so green with jealousy, it's killing you. Greg seemed like a pretty nice guy, don't you think? It's okay if I go out to dinner with him. Maybe we'll see if there's a spark." Jake, you said it yourself that we have no future, so why don't I try something different? I said, "Janet, you are my client. Your safety is my main concern. I cannot afford to have feelings for you and still do the job you pay for. I admit it, I love making love to you. You are the hottest woman I've ever shared a bed with. I'd be lying if I said I didn't love what we have. But you're the kind of woman no man can tame. You'd eat most men alive and leave them babbling. Idiots. In another life, I would have hidden you just for myself for the rest of my life. You cannot be tamed, and I don't want to be the one who gets burned when you break out of the stall." She knew I was telling the truth. She looked into my eyes, and for the first time I saw Janet Winchester tears. She said, "So I'm so bad, huh?" I said, "No, honey, you're just Janet." She said, "Okay, I'll be Janet." We had sex. We lay quietly in the back seat. She looked at me, and I saw tears again. She simply said, "Thank you, Jake, for everything." At the time, I didn't quite understand what she meant. The next night, she actually went to dinner with Greg. I kept an eye on them and stayed away so as not to interfere in her life any more than I already had. Greg began to take liberties, and she quickly put him in his place. They were discussing business, and Greg was trying to get information out of her about a deal. I put the transmitter in her bag so I could hear most of the conversation. Just when I thought their date was over, Neil walked into the restaurant. What the hell? This is too much of a coincidence. He walked over to Janet's desk, and Greg introduced Janet to him. It turned out that Neil was also interested in Janet's business. Something is starting to smell very unpleasant to me. I have a feeling that Greg, Neil, old man Jameson, and that guy I saw them with are up to something, and Janet is in the middle of it. They finished dinner, and Greg drove her back to the hotel. I returned to my room and closed the door. She had an adjoining room. She came into my room. I sat on the bed, burying my face in my hands, trying to understand it all. Janet hugged me and looked into my eyes. I said, "Is there something I need to know, Janet? I'm seeing things that don't add up." Here it is. I needed to tell him. I said, "Jake, I received several threatening letters about a deal some people want me to get involved in. I already told them I wasn't interested, but the letter implied that accidents happen to good people. It said that you have a business and loved ones who you want to prosper. All this can disappear. When I met with Greg Foreman tonight, some guy named Neil showed up. I asked, "Neil who?" She said, "I think he said Lomax. Neil Lomax." Anyway, they mentioned the same deal, said they represented the same investors, and insisted that I invest $25 million. Jake, I wouldn't be rich if I was frivolous with my money. I refused. They didn't like it. I said, "Be careful, Janet. Something is wrong here. I'll get my people to figure out what's really going on." We flew back home and made love on the plane again. She slept in my arms until we landed. We kissed and went to our cars. I returned to my apartment, lay down, and began to think about the events of the week. I wasn't happy with Janet's security measures, so I assigned my men to watch her one by one. Janet had her own personal security guards who worked for her corporation, but I wasn't sure they could be trusted. Several weeks passed before I heard from Janet. She called and said that she had received several more threatening letters. She forwarded them to my office, and I began researching their origins. It took me about a week to figure out that the letters were sent by a subsidiary of Lomax Industries. Here's the connection. The question remained, what is Susan doing with this guy? I'm sure the old senator is up to his neck in this, and so is Greg. Susan. Once I got home, it was time to do some research. If I can find out what city Janet Winchester lives in, maybe Jake is there too. The next day I was lucky. I found it on the public data website. Com registered a blue 1969 Mustang to Jake Pepper, a licensed personal security professional. A company was also associated with his name, SMJ Investigations. Those are my initials. I found the address and booked a private flight. I have to see him. I have so much to tell him. Jake. I'm just starting to figure out what Jameson and the other two are up to. They planned to trick Janet into some kind of scam, and then take over her company when the fake deal went wrong. She's been smart and resisted so far, but I don't know how Greg Foreman and Lomax planned to get her out of the way, and I don't like the prospect. I haven't spoken to Janet in weeks. I wanted to gather all the information before contacting her. It was late when I called Janet's office. Her assistant said she was heading to the airport to meet Mr. Foreman and Mr. Lomax. I immediately started calling her on her mobile phone, but every time I got to voicemail. I quickly gathered one of my guys and headed to the airport. I didn't know which terminal they would be in, so I had to look for incoming flights from Washington and hope I picked the right one. I was standing behind the security area when I suddenly saw a familiar face riding an airport electric wheelchair for the disabled towards the luggage compartment. It was Susan, again with an orthopedic boot on her foot and on crutches. Damn, this woman has no luck at all. She asked the driver to stop and got out on crutches. She looked at the three men through the terminal. It was Lomax, Foreman, and the guy I saw in Washington, and Janet was talking to them. I saw Janet shaking her head. An unknown man grabbed Janet's hand while the other two hid the fact that they were forcing her to come with them. They started pushing her out of the terminal. She resisted, but they hid it well. Susan looked at this with curiosity and began to hobble towards them on her crutches. She said, "Neil, what are you doing here? I didn't know you and Greg knew each other." At this point, I came within about 20 feet of all of them. Janet thought, I should have called Jake. I think I'm in big trouble. This Lomax, Foreman, and this other guy won't take no for an answer to their offer, and now they're trying to force me to go with them. I need to run while there are people around. As soon as I tried to break free, a woman called out to Neil. He was surprised and distracted, which gave me the opportunity to break free and run. I ran straight to Jake. I said, "Jake, help me." The woman heard me say Jake and turned around. She saw Jake and began to hobble towards him on her crutches. I didn't notice it, but the other man pulled out a gun and pointed it at me. The woman walked back to Jake, and I was just turning to the men when he fired. I looked at Jake strangely, and then everything went dark. "Jake." Janet broke free and ran towards me, but the unknown man pulled out a gun and shot her. I pulled out my weapon and fired. the guy died. People started running everywhere. Lomax raised the gun and pointed it at me. Susan screamed, "Neil, no!" just as Lomax fired. Susan threw herself in front of me and was wounded. I shot, and Lomax died. Foreman was lying on the floor and begging me not to kill him, like the last coward. There are too many people around, otherwise I would have done it. Susan looked into my eyes and whispered, "Those eyes," and with her last breath her life left her. I carefully laid her down on the floor as the paramedics arrived. I ran my hand over her frozen eyes, closing them, and then walked over to Janet. I heard that she was alive. Paramedics rushed to her side, began administering Enroman 4, and loaded her onto a stretcher. Her Susan was taken away in an ambulance before I could ask where they were going. The police were now on the scene, interviewing witnesses. They took my gun as evidence while I told them what happened and why. I knelt down next to Susan and touched her face. I saw Jameson running down the hallway screaming where his daughter was. I caught the bastard and pointed to the floor. I said, "There she is, on the floor, motherfucker. She's dead. You killed her. You and your scheme to take over Janet Winchester's company with those two dead men standing there led to her death. I have enough information to give to the police. You and Foreman will rot in prison if I have any chance of it." He said, "I know you. You're the cop I fired in Texas." I said, "Yeah, karma is a bitch, isn't it, Senator? It's a shame that Susan paid for your greed and arrogance." I burst into tears. I sobbed bitterly. The police covered Susan and her killers with sheets and continued their investigation. I did everything I could. Jake, I got to the hospital as quickly as I could. I was told that Janet was in surgery and would be there for a few hours. I took a cup of coffee and sat down with my head in my hands. Then sadness came over me. The senseless loss of one beautiful woman, and perhaps another, to money and power. The nurses and staff looked at me strangely and asked if I was injured. They showed me where to wash up and gave me a medical shirt. I cried and must have dozed off. The nurse woke me up and told me that Janet was already in the intensive care unit. I asked if it was possible to stay with her, and they replied that it was possible since she had no close relatives. When I saw her, my heart broke. This strong, sexy woman looked so pale and helpless. There were wires, tubes, and ibs everywhere. I sat next to her and watched her sleep, breathing through the machine. I held her hand. And then I realized, I love this woman. What the hell was wrong with me? I loved her all along. I was just too stubborn to admit it. I will no longer let these status things control my life. I prayed, "God, please don't take her from me too, please." The doctor came in to take a reading and check her condition. He asked, "Are you a relative?" I replied, "I was the closest person she had." He said, "Okay, it was on the edge. If all goes well, she will be able to go home with a nurse as early as next week." I looked at her raised leg and noticed the bandage around her thigh and the fresh pedicure on her legs. Her nails were covered with purple polish. I thought it was unusual since she usually prefers shiny red polish. Maybe she found another man in the last 6-7 weeks that we haven't talked to, and he likes this color. Maybe she was just trying to distance herself from me. I was stupid enough to make it clear that I was not interested in a long-term relationship. The nurse told me the best thing to do was go home, wash up, and rest. Janet may be unconscious for a couple of days. I have your number, Jake. I'll call you when she wakes up. I leaned towards her and kissed her forehead, and one tear fell into her hair. I heard the monitor speed up its signals and start making rapid sounds as soon as I kissed her. The nurse smiled. "She knows you're here, Jake. Go home, I'll take care of her." When I returned home, I realized that I still had a business to run. I checked my messages and found out that my old bank in Texas called me. My guys have new things to start. Police want to ask more questions about the shooting. I'll deal with this when I can. I took a beer from the refrigerator and plopped down in a chair. I was exhausted and fatigue caught up with me. I drank a beer and went to the shower. I cried. I sat down in the shower and sobbed like a child. Then I fell on the bed and slept for 8 hours. The feeling of loss was overwhelming. I had something to eat, got dressed, and went to the hospital. As I approached her room, I saw 8 or 9 nurses and doctors running back and forth from her room. I ran to the door, but the nurse stopped me. She said, "Don't come in now, Jake. She's in crisis. We're working on it." Her blood pressure dropped sharply. "We may have to take her back to the operating room." I got a lump in my throat. "Janet, where am I? I can't move or see. My mind is clouded. Why can't I move? The light is so bright. He calls me to go to him. He's so calm. Oh God, I see myself. Is this really death? I'm floating above my body. I see people doing things to me. I hear a long buzzing sound. Oh God, I'm dead. They give me chest compressions, trying to bring me back from the light. And suddenly, I hear beep, 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 beep. Jake, I heard the doctor say, "She's back. Her pulse is strong. I want to do a CT scan to make sure everything is fine inside." The nurse came to me and said it was close, but she came back to us. She said this sometimes happens after significant blood loss. The staff returned to make her comfortable again after all the resuscitation efforts. I sat down next to her and took her hand. I thought I felt a slight squeeze. 6 days have passed. Today she will be brought out of her coma. They stopped administering the medications that kept her asleep. The nurse said it would be several hours before she came to her senses. I looked back and saw that her assistant and several employees from her office were also there. There were flowers everywhere. I was just looking around when I noticed one bouquet from one Jim Flowers. The card said, "Get well soon. You owe me another one of those fantastic dinners with a nice follow-up. Love, Jim." She moaned as she began to come to her senses. She was disoriented. The doctor and nurse were nearby. We were asked to leave while they examined her. I watched from the doorway. A couple of hours later, she was fully awake. She was a little out of it, but conscious. God bless. Her breathing tube was removed at night, and she was breathing on her own. She had a bandage on the left side of her chest and another covering most of her back. I saw that some blood had seeped through the gauze. They said visitors were allowed to come in one at a time until she got stronger. The man pushed past me, ran to her bed, and kissed her. He said, "I was so worried about you." She could only whisper weakly. The nurse gave her ice chips to moisten her throat. I heard her whisper, "Thank you, Jim. I still owe you, don't I?" He said, "Yes, I must, young lady, and I'm going to get it." She turned her head and saw me. I saw the look on her face when she realized that I saw what happened. I walked up, squeezed her hand, smiled, and left. She tried to tell me something, but I just looked at her, shook my head, and walked away. The nurse looked at her worriedly and said, "He's been here almost 24/7 since you were brought in." She whispered, "Jake." Janet thought, "I woke up, which means I'm alive. I have pain in my chest and hip when I move." The nurse said it was normal. My nurse asked, "Do you remember what happened?" I thought for a long time and then said, "It seems that I was shot." She said, "Yes, we almost lost you. Jake was here every night, talking to you and holding your hand. He's a good person." Jim said, "What am I? Cat food?" Janet whispered, "You're a good person too, Jim. We'll catch up when I'm discharged from the hospital." The nurse said my exercise would be limited for a couple of months while my lung and leg healed. The nurse asked, "Miss Winchester, can we talk in private?" I said, "Of course. Jim, do you mind?" Jim left the room and she asked, "What term are you in?" I asked, "What? For what period?" She asked, "Is he the father?" Again I said, "What?" She said, "Janet, you're pregnant. Of course, because of your injuries, you have not noticed the usual symptoms: nausea, breast tenderness, missing women's days, and so on. Fortunately, the fetus was not harmed when you were shot and appears to be healthy." I said, "I didn't know I was pregnant, although I've been feeling weird lately, but I didn't realize it was because of the pregnancy." I had sex with Jim, but it was too early for that. I'm sure he's not the father. I haven't been paying attention to my cycle lately. Damn, damn, damn. I think the father is Jake. She said, I guess he doesn't know about it. I said, no, he has no idea. She said, you are being discharged tomorrow. Do you have someone to take you? I'll call Jake and ask if he can take me home and we'll talk. I picked up my phone and dialed Jake's number. He just switched to voicemail. The answering machine said, this is Jake. I will be out of the office indefinitely. If it is an emergency, please contact my office and one of my colleagues will call you back. Thank you for calling SMJ Investigations. This can only mean one thing. He saw and heard me and Jim and thinks he is doing me a favor. I just moved on, just like he wanted. What a mess. The next day, Jim picked me up and took me home. It took me a little time to learn how to walk on crutches, but I can handle it. I need to do a lot of breathing exercises several times a day. I have an appointment to have all my stitches removed next week. In the meantime, I need to find Jake. Unaware of this, Jake watched as Jim helped me to the door. He kissed me before I could react, and I just gave in. Jake, I saw her kiss him. She has already replaced me in her bed. I just left. I have already agreed with my guys to take care of business. My secretary has my new number to contact me for business if she needs me. I headed to Texas to look into an issue that my old bank was calling me about. I was tired. When night fell, I found a hotel with a bar. I had dinner and drinks when a beautiful woman sat down next to me. Her name was Sandy. She was a single woman, a traveler. She was 40 years old, and as I said, she was stunningly beautiful. She said, "Will you buy the girl a drink, cowboy?" I said, "Of course, ma'am, at your service." She said, "I like it." We moved to a table and chatted a little, without revealing any intimate details to each other, except that we were both lonely and needed company. She took my hand and we went to my room. We started having sex. She said, "Those eyes, Jake, your eyes are mesmerizing. How do you even keep women away from you?" I said, "You're not the first to notice that my eyes are saying something, Sandy." She said, "Thank you, Jake, for a wonderful night. I will never forget you or that night." We took a shower together, got dressed, exchanged phone numbers, and went our separate ways in the morning. About 30 miles later, my phone rang. I saw it was Sandy and answered. "See you later, lover." I never heard from her again. Just two lonely souls crossing on the road of life. Upon arriving in Texas, I went straight to the bank's investment manager, Ed Small, and told him about the phone call. Ed said, "Yes, welcome, Mr. Pepper. I'm the one who called you. Miss Susan Jameson opened an account in your name about 6 years ago, after settling a case against the city. We tried to contact you, but no one knew where you were. Miss Jameson filed a lawsuit against the city on your behalf, and you were awarded $5 million for wrongful termination. It appears that the city manager, the police chief, and several county commissioners were fired because of this incident. I heard that Miss Jameson died tragically. I'm sorry." I said, "Me too." Over the years, the account has grown to more than 7 million. I couldn't believe that Susan cared about me despite her father. I opened an account in Miami and transferred money there. Once everything was settled, I left my car at home and flew to Florida, where I bought an oceanfront villa in Coral Springs. I checked my phone and noticed that the number of calls from Janet had dropped dramatically. I think she has finally left for her lover. Janet. I was lying in my bed after having sex with Jim. My belly was just starting to show. Jim had not noticed this yet, but I knew that soon I would have to tell him, because I could no longer hide my pregnancy. I have always had a perfect body without putting in much effort. This too began to change. Am I ready for motherhood? I hope so. My leg and chest are healed, and I feel better overall. I decided that I needed to find Jake. I searched and searched. Nobody wants to say where he is. I have many contacts all over the world. I'm going to use every resource I can find to find him. I know what he saw with Jim looked bad, But I don't like Jim. He was just a distraction, albeit a sexy one. I think it was something more for him. Jim was in love. One of my contacts in Florida found a man, and he thinks it's Jake. I'm 6 months old, soon to be 7. I need to find him before it's time to have his baby. After this, I will not be able to travel when the deadline approaches. Will he believe that this is his child? I don't know. I'm flying there this afternoon to make sure it's him. I have an address. When I landed, my stomach churned with excitement. What will I tell him? I have no speech for this case. My driver arrived at a beautiful villa. I walked up to the door and was about to knock, but I heard someone talking behind the house. I walked around the house and saw him. He was relaxing by the pool, talking on the phone. He didn't notice me. I walked up to him and stood next to him, looking down at him. Jake, I said, "Hey, you're blocking my son." I rolled over and looked out at the pool deck and saw 10 of the most beautiful, perfect royal blue toes in the sexiest 4-inch heels I've ever seen. Janet said, "Hello, sailor. You are a difficult person to find. I didn't know anyone was looking for me, especially you. When I left, it seemed like you had a man you could stand when he drove you home from the hospital. The kiss looked like it would curl your toes with what I saw." Janet said, "Did you see us?" I said, "Yes, every crushing second." "I'm sorry you saw that, Jake. Jim has a crush on me, or at least an image of me, and yes, we had sex." I said, "Your sex life is no longer my business. Janet, I realized too late that I was in love with you. It took almost losing you to realize it. I sat with you almost around the clock until your lover burst in and kissed you. When you woke up, that's when I realized I was too late. You were with him right up until the day you got shot. So yeah, Janet, if that means anything now, I'm in love with you." She said, "What? Do you love me? Jake, we need to talk." I looked at Janet and then I noticed. I said, "Wow, I think we really need to talk. Who's the lucky dad? Jim's probably ecstatic. You slept with him before you got shot, right? Does he know he's going to be a dad?" Janet said, "No, Jake, you got me pregnant. It's your son who puts pressure on my bladder every minute of the day. I think it happened on the plane or that session in the limo. I'm 6 months along, stupid. That means you are the one who did the dirty deed. Mr. Pepper, one of your soldiers completed his mission and deserves a medal. You made Janet Winchester pregnant. Be proud of it." I looked at her in disbelief. Then it dawned on me what she meant when she thanked me for everything that evening in the limousine. She originally intended for me to make her a child. She said, "Jake, I quit the pills almost 3 weeks before that trip with you. I wanted you. I was pregnant when I was shot. I didn't know it at the time. They discovered the pregnancy while I was in the hospital. Janet, I spent every night with you until I found out I was replaced. It hurt me. I didn't think it would, but it hurt. A lot. When your lover walked into the hospital like he owned you, I saw that the time had come for me to leave." Janet said, "It's not fair, Jake. You told me many times that we had no future, but you kept having sex with me. I wanted your baby. I thought maybe if you got me pregnant, you'd reconsider your feelings because I don't need a father for my child. I have money, everything I need, except you in my bed every night." Jim showed up and everything just kind of took off. To be honest, I knew I was having a fertile period in Washington. I said, "What about blue nail polish? I thought a color change was for your new man." She said, "Blue. For your son, Jake, it's a boy." I stood up and looked into her eyes. She looked into mine and said, "Those eyes, I can't get enough of them." I took her hand and led her into the house. She melted in my arms. She said, "Make love to me, Jake." I said, "No, honey, we'll have time for this. We have something to do." I told her to relax in my bedroom while I went to the nearest international jewelry store and bought a 4-carat diamond engagement ring for $120,000 and then returned to the villa. When I walked in, Janet was lying in my bed talking on the phone. I overheard her say, "No, Jim, Nothing you say will change my mind. It was fun, but I'm not in love with you. I'm sorry, but this is the end. I'm surprised I haven't noticed yet, but I'm pregnant, Jim. No, it's not your child. The man I've loved for a long time got me pregnant before you and I started dating. Thank you for being a friend. I sat down next to her and touched her face, then put my hand on her rounded belly, which contained my son. She smiled at me. I said, "How are you feeling, Miss Winchester?" She said, "I feel more like a whale every day." I said, "A very beautiful whale, if I may." She slapped my hand. It was Jim. I tried to let him go gently, but of course he was offended. "You have such an effect on the male half of humanity, Miss Winchester." I called my crew and told them to get ready to go to sea. I said, "I have a day planned for us, Miss Winchester." She said, "Oh." I asked, "Did you take your swimsuit with you?" She nodded and said, "Yes, I have one. I designed it especially for us pregnant whales. I work in the fashion industry after all." I took her hand and we walked to my private pier where my yacht, Miss SMJ, was moored. I helped her on board and she was stunned. She asked who owned the yacht, stroking the gorgeous trim and other expensive items on board. I motioned to the captain to take us out to sea. I showed Janet around the yacht without answering her questions. The steward bought us drinks, a beer for me, a soft drink for Janet. The steward asked, "Is there anything I can get you, Miss Winchester?" Janet looked at her in surprise. I said, "That's all for today, Donna." Janet looked at me and said, "Okay, Jake Pepper, what's going on? Who owns this gorgeous yacht? This is amazing." I took Janet's hand and led her to the captain's bridge. I looked at her and said, "This yacht belongs to Mr. and Mrs. Jake Pepper." Janet's heart sank. She thought, "Is Donna his wife?" She said, "I think you better take me back to my plane, Jake, so I can go home. I didn't know you were married. Sorry for the intrusion." I got down on one knee and took out the ring. I said, "Sorry, Janet. I should have said that this yacht will belong to Mr. and Mrs. Jake Pepper as soon as the ex-Janet Lee Winchester agrees to marry me." I put the ring on her finger. Her legs gave way, and I caught her in my arms. She cried and hugged me. She said, "You obnoxious asshole. Yes, Mr. Pepper. Yes, I will be your wife." This beautiful billionaire was like a teenager in seventh heaven. I took her to our cabin and took off all her clothes, leaving only her sandals. She said, "Jake, I don't have any clothes on the yacht." I said, "My love, you won't need it. I want to see you and our creation in your belly whenever I want. The dress code on our yacht is nudity only." I kissed her rounded belly. Then she saw Donna again, who was also as naked as she was. I said, "Yes, that's right, Janet. Everyone on this yacht is naked except the captain. That's my dress code." She said, "Jake, I love you so much." I said, "I love you even more." She said, "I never thanked you for saving my life." I said, "I failed. I let them get to you and hurt you." She said, "No, Jake, it was my decision to meet Greg and Lomax. You didn't know. If you hadn't found me, I would have died and Susan would have lived." I said, "I thought you might have noticed the name of the yacht and figured out my secret." She said, "Of course I should have guessed, Miss SMJ." We anchored off one of the islands for the night. That night, a Caribbean storm broke out. We lay together and watched the lightning dance across the sky. We slept like the dead. The next evening, we made love again on the deck under the stars. She said, "Jake, I want to get married before Jake Jr. is born." She said, "I can't wait to be your wife. Let's get married this weekend if we can get a license." We did it, and Janet became Mrs. Janet Pepper on Saturday night in Miami, Florida. Of course, Janet had many questions about my changed lifestyle, about the villa, yacht, and so on. I explained to her that Susan sued the city after they fired me. Janet said, "I'm starting to understand now. She saved your life. twice. I didn't understand your connection to her, but now I do. I said, she didn't know about the plan to take over your company. She was surprised to see Greg and Lomax at the airport that day, having no idea that she was going to die. I almost lost you too. She said, I'm too angry to die. I said, I have something else to tell you, and I don't know how you'll take it. She looked at me curiously. I said, in addition to the settlement, Susan left me her entire estate in her will, which is valued at more than $300 million. Janet said, wow, honey, she really loved you, didn't she? I said, I'm going to give almost all but $100 million to charity. Janet said, Jake, I'll donate the same amount. I said, Janet Lee Pepper, you're great. Of course, Janet was a billionaire, and since then we have been active in philanthropy, directing aid to where it was needed most. 3 months after this conversation, Jacob Mark Pepper Jr. was born. When he was brought to Janet for feeding, she looked at him and said, those eyes. He has those same eyes. My world is full. My husband is the most wonderful man in the world. My rich days are behind me. I see Jake's smoldering eyes in little Jake. He is now 3 years old, and my belly is bloated along with our daughter. To be continued. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. She will be there very soon. The link to the sequel will be in the description of this video below. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.